So, hi, I am delighted to now introduce Matt Katsaros. Many of you know already. Matt's been a researcher and product specialist with Facebook, where he was for a number of years before breaking out on his own as an independent researcher and consultant. And he is now director of the Social Media Governance Initiative at Yale Law School. So I'm not sure exactly when, but somewhere along that ride, Matt conducted a couple of pretty amazing field studies that tested prosocial digital interventions. And it's that work that introduced Matt to PDN. And in conversations since, we've learned a tremendous amount from his experience conducting collaborative research, as well as about how principles of procedural justice and governance can both be integrated into platform systems and result in prosocial outcomes for all users. So we're really excited that Matt's joining us to share his experience, insights, and knowledge today with all of you. So hello, Matt.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. I'm going to start asking you a question that I ask a lot of people, and it's a question, we ask ourselves at Prosocial Design Network a lot too. What does prosocial design mean to you? So what does it encompass? And if you can also begin to talk a little bit about the work that you do that is related to prosocial design.
Sure. Also, if I might have to turn my video off at some point because my wife and I are both doing interview things right now on the internet. So if it gets choppy, I might have to turn it off. But yeah, well, as you said, I kind of spent all my career working in industry, and a lot of that working on teams that kind of fall under the trust and safety umbrella. And the last couple of years, I've been running the social media governance initiative. And one of the things I kind of really felt working on these teams was the focus was on trust and safety. In fact, when I started working on one of those teams at Facebook, it was called Protect and Care. And it was actually quite a different team. And it kind of followed that name. Like there was a group of people with the organization who was focusing on protecting people and the platform from abuse and harms. And then there was a group in our organization who was equally concerned with like caring for people on the platform. They were focused on measuring subjective well-being.
Hi, I'm out of the office. I am.
Hey.
Hi, I'm going to mute. Y'all can mute yourselves. That would be great. Thank you.
And so there was a group of people who were. Oops. We're good. I think I got muted. All right. There's a group of people who are concerned with kind of measuring subjective well-being. They were running really amazing experiments around trying to encourage people to express gratitude. There's a lot of research around like expressions of gratitude and how that can have kind of immediate and lasting effects on someone's well-being. And, at around 2016, 2017 is when the organization got shifted, and it changed quite a bit. And they actually kind of severed off that care section and really just focused on kind of they called it integrity, the like protecting the platform from harm and abusers and trolls. And while I really enjoyed that work and I really enjoyed the people I got to work with, it was clear to me that a lot of the strategic approach was basically just kind of like waiting for things to happen, trying to act as fast as they could when they happened on the platform. But a lot of it was kind of like a response to things. It was not a lot of upstream interventions. It was not, many of us who are working on this could point to all the parts of the platform that were kind of like helping to accelerate many of the issues, whether it was the way people are onboarded to platforms, aggressive growth strategies. At Facebook, they had this famous like PYMK unit. It's the people you may know. It was the way that like they encouraged you to connect with people on the platform, to kind of fill out your news feed. And a lot of work was looked into like who's being suggested and what kind of norms are those like first 10 friends that you make on Facebook suggesting to you, and how does that affect your kind of downstream behavior. And but that was not a lot of the work that we got to work on. We focused on kind of what do you do when hate speech exists on the platform, what are the rules around it, how do you let people report it, how do you identify it algorithmically and remove it, how do you punish people once they've posted it. So for me, a lot of my thought in response to spending years doing that work is kind of how can we kind of create digital environments that try to like minimize many of those harms from happening altogether. Not that you don't need to be prepared for when they do for sure arise, like the, you know, I think if there's anything we've learned from many, many decades of social spaces on the internet, like there's going to be many problems that exist, but there are lots of ways to design and set up your environment that can encourage kind of communities to connect with each other in more positive and healthy ways.
Thanks. That's I appreciate a lot of the conversations we've had with folks over the years talks about, and you know, you led a lot of these conversations, talks about kind of the transition from just merely reacting to the negative content, and then seeing, as you say, how we can not only minimize harms, but also encourage communities to interact in positive ways. One of the things that we're trying to understand at PDN is when we talk to folks, they're really interested in, or we hear that they want to know about what are the principles of prosocial design. And so coming, you know, learning from you about procedural justice and how that can be applied has been really instructive to us. So can you talk a little bit about procedural justice theory, its application to design, so you get a better an idea of what it's all about?
So procedural justice is a theory around fairness in decision-making context. It's a theory that has been studied in many contexts, both kind of, you know, in a lot of researches in the policing and criminal legal arena. So how do police and citizens interact? How do people experience the courts, correctional officers and inmates? But it's also been studied with doctors and patients. How does a doctor encourage a patient to do, you know, proactive screening for breast cancer? It's, you know, one of the places it was first studied was in kind of organizational theory. How do managers and workers relate to each other, and how do you treat employees in ways that they think are fair and they're likely to kind of trust and trust you and listen to your decisions. And so it's a theory of fairness that focuses on the process through which decisions are made. And this is in kind of contrast to theories of fairness like distributive justice, which really focus on the outcomes, which is like, how do you most fairly distribute outcomes or resources given your context. Procedural justice, on the other hand, is kind of rooted in the psychology of fairness and kind of how do people perceive decisions and decision-making processes as fair. And again, studied across many contexts, like I mentioned, but also like cross-culturally. It's been studied around the world over many decades. And, you know, one thing is pretty clear, and it's kind of obvious, as a lot of scientific social science research is like people care about how they're treated. That's kind of the basis of it. I think, you know, the principles of what makes a fair process, they vary depending on, you know, again, if you're talking about like a doctor and a patient, or a police citizen interaction, or a social media platform and one of its customers. However, research tends to orient around a couple things that people think are salient in what makes a fair process. One is people want to be treated with dignity and respect. This is actually one that I kind of didn't think that much about in the context of kind of translating that theory into online governance, because a lot of the interactions that people have are kind of, I mean, sometimes you're interacting with like an actual moderator of a community and you might know the person, whether like in real life or kind of digitally, but a lot of the times it's some kind of a platform that's sending these messages that might be like canned auto response. And I just didn't think much about that kind of dignity and respect pillar of procedural justice, because a lot of the research, when you look into it, is around kind of interpersonal communication. There's a lot of studies around how police interact with citizens, and really amazing experiment. They just give police like scripts when you do a traffic stop, like, here, use this script instead of what you would normally say. And they're very slight tweaks to like how you introduce yourself, how you talk to the person, how you treat them. And it all often comes down to kind of interpersonal communication. And what I've been realizing over the last year or so, as we've been doing more studies across different platforms and asking people about these different aspects of procedural justice, is this is one that people feel is really lacking when it comes to kind of decisions made on their account or their content. And I think what we're realizing is like the way in which people are treated, where they're having rules enforced against them and they don't often get a chance to communicate back. That's another principle I can talk about around voice, but they're just getting these kind of canned auto responses. It makes people feel like they aren't really an individual, like they're just treated like one of the masses, and it doesn't make them feel like they're being treated with dignity and respect. Another pillar is kind of transparency. That is often as simple as like, what are the rules? Like what are the rules? Who makes decisions? How are decisions being made? In our context, it can be, are decisions made by people or are they made by algorithms? Not that either is, I mean, sometimes one might be better than the other, but people want to know, at least they want to have a clear understanding of who's making decisions, how are those decisions made. Similarly, kind of neutrality and consistency is an important thing. People want to know that, to give a great example that plays out all the time is like, if we are in some kind of fight with each other in a comment thread, if I say something and you say basically the same thing back to me, why is it that my post got removed or my comment got removed but yours didn't? This is something I hear a lot in my interviews and research. Or often the people perceive inconsistencies around not just like the thing that was said, but like your kind of status in a community or on a platform. So like, why is it that this person can say the exact, I just retweeted the thing that person said, but they have 5 million followers, I have 500 followers, so I get punished. Of course, a really big one when it comes to consistency is kind of political viewpoint. I feel like I'm being targeted because of my political stance, but this person, they get to say whatever they want because the company, the platform kind of agrees with their political stance. And then lastly, a really important one is voice. Like when people are having decisions made, they want to be able to express their side of the story. They want to make sure that kind of all the facts are being considered in a case. And I think an important thing to note about voice that I often kind of encounter pushback from platforms who are really concerned with scale is, we don't want to give people a voice or like any way to appeal. I mean, now the DSA kind of compels certain platforms to actually offer people ways to appeal. But the concern is like, oh, we don't have the bandwidth, the capacity to kind of review and respond and like look over all these appeals or people's considerations. And one thing to note in the research is like, even giving people the opportunity to express themselves, regardless of whether that voice changes the outcome of the decision, is important in people's trust and legitimacy of the outcome or of the decision. And I think the reason ultimately why we care about procedural justice is research is pretty clear across many of these contexts that if you kind of improve the perceived fairness of the process through giving people a voice, treating them with dignity and respect, offering transparency, people are more likely to trust you. They're more likely to accept decisions, even when those decisions are unfavorable to them. People know that they can't always get their way, especially in research in the criminal legal context. Like even when you lose your case or you're, supposed to, you're fined or something like that, you're more likely to follow through and follow rules in the future if you believe the process was fair and if you trust it. And I, sometimes helpful in kind of translating this theory is maybe giving an example or talking through how I stumbled upon it. So I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, that would be great. I'm going to open up the floor to questions in a couple of minutes, but I want to get one in, and it's actually, you might have just been about to answer it. But first, I want to say I love that we could talk about procedural justice theory, or we could really talk about people care about how they are treated, which I think really gets to the point. And as you said, it's kind of intuitive and obvious once you think of it. So thanks for that great overview. And what was really, when we talked about this, what was really compelling about the work that you do and about procedural justice theory is that it kind of mixes these kind of normative ideals we have about, individual dignity and respect with kind of psychology and outcomes, so that it turns out when you treat people with respect, you actually get better outcomes. So I wonder if that's where you were going, if you could talk about an example of integrating these principles into platforms and seeing those positive results.
When I first came across this, I was working at Facebook as a researcher on a team trying to detect algorithmically all sorts of kind of violating content, whether it was nudity and pornography, sexually suggestive content, hate speech, graphic violence. And, these teams were comprised of just machine learning engineers, and I was there to try to kind of align the way they were building these algorithms towards people's, both towards like Facebook's rules of what is and isn't allowed, but also like people's perceptions of these constructs of hate speech or hateful content. And we were getting pretty good at it. Like it was really new technology at the time, and we were kind of taking stuff that machine learning scientists were only just developing and creating clear applications of it for the platform. And there were tremendous resources put into identifying content that was violating rules on the platform and then sending it to our ops team where, thousands of distributed people around the world were reviewing it according to Facebook's rules and then pressing a delete button. And no one could really answer or seem to even care about what happened after the delete button was pressed. And I can say that the prevailing kind of myth of the people working on the trust and safety at that time, and it persists across many teams still, was that people who create violating content on the platform are kind of bad actors. They're trolls, they are malicious, they have financial or political motives. And that is definitely true for some things. In times on like nudity and pornography, it was dominated by spammers. They're posting this stuff because they know people click on it, and then they take you to a site where they sell cheap ads or they install malware, all sorts of things. But when it came to things like harassment, bullying, hate speech, like rarely were these kind of sophisticated actors. They weren't coordinated often. Sometimes they were, but mostly they were just kind of regular people. And there wasn't a lot of thought into like what happens after we press delete. And so I began a project with a peer of mine where we just started talking to people who were breaking rules. And again, this was like totally new, and I got laughed at. They're like, what are you going to learn from talking to them? They don't even want to talk to you. They're just trolls. But also, what might you uncover? They're just going to try to troll you or like make fun of you. Like, and as it turns out, like empirically, over years of doing that research, it was untrue. People really wanted to talk to us. Like response rates on surveys or interview requests were much higher for the population of people who break rules on the platform than a general population. And that becomes clear when you look at it through a procedural justice framework. Like people wanted to express their voice. I would get on the phone with these people and they were like, God, I've been waiting to talk to someone at Facebook to like tell them my story. And it was not, I was nervous the first couple interviews because I was like, how am I going to, I could see what they posted and some of it was pretty atrocious, hateful speech. And it's like, how do I kind of like, I don't want to confront someone about this, but how do I ask them about this experience in a way that doesn't make them defensive, or are they even willing to talk about it? And as it turns out, people were, I didn't have to worry about it because people were so eager to talk about it. And you quickly learn a lot of stuff. Like a lot of people at the time, and even still, didn't know that Facebook had rules. In fact, I'm looking at survey results from a similar survey I've run at many other platforms, but on Nextdoor. And literally 25% of people who have content removed on that platform are not aware that they had content removed. And which also inhibits all the other questions I ask in the survey about like, do you know why it was removed? Do you know what the rules are? But as a starting point, they literally don't know that they had kind of any enforcement against their account. But it became really clear through these interviews that Facebook's posture towards this was, you know, we wait for bad things to happen and we act really quickly. But as it turns out, you know, there was a lot more that they could do upstream, or there was a lot more that they could do even when they were enforcing the rules around giving people education and trying to allow them to appeal their decisions and things like that. And so we started running experiments, providing more transparency, and we saw both an increase in people's perceptions of fairness going up, but we also saw kind of reductions in recidivism. People were less likely to break the rules again. And it kind of makes sense, like if you know what the rules are and you're interested and willing to follow them, and someone actually tells you what they are, then you're likely to follow them in the future.
And that's perfect. I know we're running a little bit late, so what I'm going to do is open up the floor to questions right now. First, I'm going to stop recording.